Hello everyone. Today we dive into one of the hottest topics of the week, Europe's reaction to Donald Trump's new approach toward the war in Ukraine. His diplomacy promises a quick peace, but for many European leaders, it sounds more like a ticking time bomb. So, what's going on? Let's break it down. Let's start with Germany. This week, German Vice Chancellor and Finance Minister Lars Klingbeil made an unexpected trip to Kiev. Symbolism matters. Germany remains Ukraine's biggest donor in Europe. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, Berlin has provided over 50 billion euros in aid, not just weapons, but also economic, humanitarian, and energy support. Klingbeil stressed one key point: Russia should not count on Germany's fatigue. According to him, the only road to peace goes through negotiations with Ukraine at the table, not backroom deals where Kiev is sidelined. He also demanded real security guarantees for Ukrainians to make sure Moscow cannot simply regroup and attack again. Meanwhile, European leaders from France, Germany, Poland, Italy, the UK, and Finland issued a joint statement after their talks in Washington. They welcomed Trump's interest in diplomacy but drew a few red lines. First, no deal without Ukraine's participation. Second, no changes to borders through the use of force. And third, Ukraine's course toward NATO and the EU is not up for debate. Translation: Europe supports peace, but not at the price of Ukraine's surrender. Now here's the tricky part: Trump's approach is both hopeful and, let's say, suspiciously vague. On one hand, his rhetoric suggests he wants to end the war quickly. On the other, his proposals lack substance. In talks with European leaders at the White House, Trump mentioned some kind of security guarantees for Ukraine after the war. But what does that mean? He ruled out US troops, ruled out NATO obligations, and left only fuzzy promises about support with intelligence, air power, or maybe naval presence. In other words, a handshake deal, not a strategy. And this is exactly why Europe is cautious. They know Trump negotiates like a businessman, not a statesman. Today he talks about peace. Tomorrow, who knows? Maybe tariffs on European steel. His unpredictability makes European capitals nervous, because their security and Ukraine's survival are on the line. Criticism is already mounting. The Financial Times recently ran a sharp editorial accusing European leaders of, quote, selling their souls. Instead of standing firm, they appear too eager to flatter Trump, smiling for the cameras and nodding politely while he speaks in generalities. Sure, it might keep Washington's goodwill in the short term, but it makes Europe look like a client state rather than an independent power. And that brings us to the bigger question: should Europe stop relying so heavily on the United States? Calls for so-called strategic autonomy are growing louder. The idea is simple: Europe must build its own defense capacity, coordinate military spending, and create rapid reaction forces. Not because they want to ditch NATO, but because Trump or any future US president can change policy overnight. And Europe can't afford to be caught off guard again. Experts are calling this a turning point. The war is happening on European soil, yet the continent still relies too much on American protection. If Washington hesitates, Europe risks being paralyzed. That's why leaders talk about ramping up arms production, developing air defense systems, investing in drones, and pooling resources. In short, Europe must learn to stand on its own 2 feet. But what does this mean for Ukraine? In practical terms, it means that Kiev is not alone. Yes, Trump's peace plan sounds cloudy at best, but Europe has made its stance clear: no land giveaways, no deals over Ukraine's head, and no compromises on sovereignty. That political backing is just as important as tanks or missiles, because it tells Moscow, Europe is not backing down. So, to sum up, Europe is walking a very fine line. They're willing to listen to Trump's peace ideas, but they're not going to sacrifice their core principles just to keep him happy. The next few months will show whether Trump has an actual plan or if this is just political theater aimed at his domestic audience. But one thing is already certain: Europe is becoming tougher, more united, and more determined to protect Ukraine, with or without Washington's full commitment. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Europe can really become more independent while still keeping America on board? Big changes are coming, and we'll keep breaking them down for you here. See you next time.